Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why something that feels so freeing in the moment so often leads to feeling trapped later in life? You were promised a version of happiness that never came with a warning label. You were told that more experiences would make you stronger, that fewer boundaries would make you powerful, that saying yes more often meant you were finally living for yourself. And at first, it feels true. Attention feels good. Desire feels validating. Being wanted feels like proof that you matter. In those moments, it feels like control. It feels like confidence. It feels like winning. But there is a quiet cost no one talks about. A cost that doesn't show up right away, a cost that waits until time, responsibility, and reality arrive together. The human mind is not designed for endless detachment. Every connection leaves an imprint. Every bond, even the brief ones, trains your nervous system to expect intensity instead of stability. Over time, the brain learns to chase the rush, not the relationship. It starts confusing excitement with meaning, novelty with value, attention with security. This is where the story usually breaks, because life eventually demands more than feeling good. It demands consistency. It demands patience. It demands planning. And when those muscles were ever trained, everything begins to feel heavy. Commitment feels boring. Responsibility feels suffocating. Long-term thinking feels foreign. Not because something is wrong with you, but because you were conditioned for the short term. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Freedom without direction is not empowerment. It is drift. And drifting feels amazing until you realize you are far from where you hope to be. Choices that seem small in isolation quietly stack up. The brain adapts to what it repeats. When instant gratification becomes the default, future-oriented thinking weakens. Discipline feels unnatural. Boundaries feel restrictive. Yet those very things are what create safety, stability, and real freedom later. Many people don't notice this shift until a moment forces clarity. A responsibility that cannot be ignored, a consequence that cannot be undone, a life that suddenly requires structure instead of spontaneity. At that point, the culture that celebrated every choice is silent. There are no slogans, no applause, just reality and the weight of decisions made long before the moment arrived. If you stay with this message, you gain something most people never get. You gain awareness before damage becomes destiny. You gain the power to see patterns instead of blaming luck. You gain the chance to understand how the mind works before it works against you. This is not about shame. It is not about judgment. It is about clarity, because clarity returns control. The truth is harsh because it has to be. Soft lies feel better, but they cost more. Honest awareness feels uncomfortable, but it saves futures. If you are willing to look at choices through the lens of long-term outcomes, instead of short-term feelings, you unlock a different kind of strength. One built on intention, one built on foresight, one built on self-respect that doesn't fade when attention does. Stay here. Because understanding this is not about the past, it is about reclaiming the future before it quietly slips away. Once you see how easily the mind is trained by repetition, the picture becomes clearer and harder to ignore. The brain does not judge your intentions. It responds to patterns. What you repeat becomes what you expect. What you expect becomes what you tolerate. And what you tolerate eventually becomes what you choose, even when it no longer serves you. Human company. Connection is not neutral. Every intimate bond triggers chemistry designed for attachment. Hormones are released to create closeness, safety, and trust. This is not romance, it is biology. When that system is activated again and again without continuity, the brain adapts by protecting itself. It dulls attachment. It lowers emotional investment. It learns how to disconnect faster than it connects. At once felt deep begins to feel replaceable. This is where many people misunderstand themselves. They think they are becoming stronger, more independent, more selective. In reality, the nervous system is becoming cautious, guarded, less capable of long-term bonding. Not because commitment is bad, but because repeated endings teach the mind that endings are normal, that nothing lasts, that investment is risky. At the same time, attraction begins to shift. Stability feels flat, predictability feels boring, calm feels like emptiness. The brain, trained on intensity, seeks intensity. It chases emotional spikes instead of emotional safety. And without realizing it, the criteria for choosing partners changes. Excitement becomes the filter. Chemistry becomes the proof. Consistency is overlooked because it doesn't trigger the same rush. But long-term security has never been built on rush. It is built on reliability, on patterns that can be trusted, on behavior that doesn't change when conditions do. This is where psychology and reality collide. Commitment is a risk assessment, whether people admit it or not. When someone evaluates a future, they look for signals of stability, restraint, and foresight, not perfection, predictability. When those signals are weak or inconsistent, commitment stalls, not out of cruelty, out of caution. And when commitment stalls, relationships remain temporary, unprotected, undefined, drifting. This is not where long-term planning thrives. This is where consequences quietly accumulate. Many people are shocked when responsibility arrives and support disappears. They believed emotion would turn into structure, that feeling would turn into presence. But emotion is not a contract, desire is not duty, and chemistry does not create character. Pressure does not build responsibility. It exposes what was already there. This is the moment where confusion turns into pain, where people ask why things fell apart, instead of recognizing how they were built. The truth is uncomfortable but empowering. Outcomes are rarely random. They are shaped by repeated choices, guided by unexamined patterns. Understanding this is not about blame. It is about power. When you understand how attachment works, you can stop confusing attention with security. When you understand how conditioning works, you can retrain your expectations. When you understand how attraction has been shaped, you can choose differently instead of reacting automatically. This awareness is the turning point, because the same brain that learned chaos can learn discipline. The same system that adapted to instability can adapt to structure. Nothing is broken, it has simply been trained. And what is trained can be retrained. If you stay conscious instead of defensive, something shifts. You stop chasing what feels good now and start choosing what holds you later. You begin valuing peace over intensity, direction over impulse, foundation over fantasy. This is not loss. This is growth. This is where control quietly returns. Not through restriction, but through understanding that real freedom is the ability to choose long-term strength over short-term escape. When control begins to return, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. Many of the outcomes people call bad luck are not accidents at all. They are patterns playing out exactly as they were trained to. Life does not punish, it reflects. It mirrors the habits you repeat and the standards you accept, even when you are not conscious of them. When excitement becomes the compass, direction is lost. Intensity feels like connection, but intensity is unstable by nature. It burns fast and fades fast. Relationships built on thrill alone are designed to peak, not last. They feel powerful at first because the nervous system is lit up. Attention is constant, emotions are amplified, everything feels urgent and alive. But urgency is not sustainability. Fire cannot heat a home forever. Over time, the mind starts equating emotional spikes with value. Calm begins to feel empty. Consistency feels uninspiring. The very qualities required for long-term partnership are misread as weakness or lack of chemistry. This distortion quietly reshapes decisions. Partners are chosen based on feeling instead of function, on presence instead of reliability, on desire instead of direction. Responsibility avoidance is rarely high. It shows up early in small ways, in inconsistency, in excuses, in emotional availability without practical support. But when the mind is focused on how something feels right now, warning signs are reframed as misunderstandings or temporary flaws. Hope replaces observation. Chemistry replaces assessment. This is where many futures are decided long before anyone realizes it, because pressure does not create character. Pressure reveals it. When life becomes serious, when structure is required, when sacrifice is unavoidable, the truth surfaces. Those who avoided responsibility before will not suddenly embrace it after. Those who lived for the moment will not magically shift into long-term builders. This realization hurts because it removes fantasy. It forces clarity, and clarity can fade. El brutal when it arrives late. But it is also the doorway to transformation when it arrives early enough to change direction. Nothing about this is destiny. Patterns feel permanent only when they remain unconscious. The moment awareness enters, choice returns. The moment you stop mistaking intensity for intimacy, you regain the ability to select stability. The moment you stop romanticizing unpredictability, you begin attracting consistency. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming intentional, about recognizing that excitement fades, but structure supports, that passion burns out, but discipline builds, that attraction gets attention, but character sustains presence. The most powerful shift happens when you stop asking how something makes you feel and start asking where it leads. Does it build? Does it stabilize? Does it support growth when life becomes heavy? Or does it rely on circumstances staying easy? When you choose with direction instead of impulse, outcomes change. Not overnight, but permanently. The mind rewires through repetition. New standards create new results. Calm becomes attractive again. Reliability feels safe instead of boring. Long-term thinking feels empowering instead of restrictive. This is where strength matures. Not in chasing what excites you, but in selecting what sustains you. Not in proving freedom, but in building security. The people who win long-term are not the ones who felt the most. They are the ones who chose with clarity when it mattered most. And clarity, once embraced, does not take anything away. It gives something control, stability, and the ability to create a future that does not collapse when reality arrives. As clarity sharpens, the focus naturally widens beyond the individual. Because no choice exists in isolation. Every decision creates ripples, and eventually those ripples reach lives that never had a say in how the water was stirred. This is where the weight of reality becomes undeniable, not as punishment, but as consequence. When structure is missing, pressure multiplies. When responsibility is carried alone, stress becomes constant. And when support is inconsistent, stability becomes fragile. This environment does not appear overnight. It is built slowly, through patterns that were never questioned early enough. Good intentions do not erase the need for systems. Love alone does not replace presence. And effort cannot substitute for structure when life becomes demanding. Children do not understand excuses. They understand patterns. They learn from what they observe, not what they are told. They absorb stress before they can name it. They adapt to instability before they can articulate fear. And they internalize absence long before they can process why it exists. This is not about blame. It is about impact. Raising a child requires more than survival. It requires emotional regulation, consistency, authority balanced with care. When one person is stretched across every role, exhaustion becomes the norm. Patience thins, energy depletes, and the environment becomes reactive instead of intentional. Even the strongest individuals struggle under this weight. Cycles begin here, not because anyone wants them to, but because unresolved patterns repeat themselves. Children raised without stability often seek intensity later in life because calm feels unfamiliar. They chase what feels known, even when it is harmful. And without intervention, the same dynamics replay across generations. This is why awareness matters so deeply, not to shame the past, but to protect the future. Responsibility is not just about carrying a load. It is about choosing conditions that reduce the load before it exists. It is about foresight, about restraint, about understanding that prevention is quieter than repair, but infinitely more powerful. Society often celebrates resilience while ignoring the unnecessary hardship that created it. But resilience should not be the goal. Stability should be. Strength is not proven by how much chaos you survive. It is proven by how much chaos you prevent. When you understand this, the narrative shifts. Discipline stops feeling restrictive and starts feeling protective. Standards stop feeling judgmental and start feeling compassionate. Boundaries stop feeling cold and start feeling caring, not just for yourself, but for those who depend on. The choices you make long before they are affected by them. This awareness is heavy because it matters, because lives are shaped by it, because futures depend on it, and because pretending otherwise only delays the cost. There is power in choosing differently while you still can. Power in slowing down, in evaluating, in asking not just what feels good now, but what holds steady when life applies. Pressure. The strongest decisions are rarely the loudest. They are quiet, deliberate, and future-facing. When intention replaces impulse, everything changes. Not instantly, not magically, but fundamentally. The environment shifts, the outcomes stabilize, and the cycle weakens. This is not about perfection. It is about responsibility in its truest form. The kind that looks beyond the moment and chooses to build something that does not break when reality arrives. Choosing responsibility before chaos. Performs is not weakness. It is foresight. It is the quiet strength most people never develop because it requires saying no when yes feels easier and waiting when gratification is offered immediately. This is where real power lives, not in reaction but in intention. Discipline has been misrepresented as limitation when in truth it is protection. It protects time, it protects energy, it protects the future from decisions made in moments of emotional hunger. Standards are not walls meant to isolate. They are filters designed to keep instability out. When standards are clear, confusion fades. When boundaries are firm, outcomes stabilize. Delayed gratification is not about denial. It is about alignment. About choosing actions that serve the version of you who will live with the consequence. CES tomorrow, not just the emotions of today. Every time restraint is practiced, the brain rewires itself toward long-term thinking. Patience strengthens, impulse weakens. The internal compass shifts from craving to clarity. This is how cycles are broken, not through regret but through conscious change. Awareness creates distance between urge and action. Distance creates choice, and choice creates a future that is built instead of survived. The past does not disappear, but it no longer dictates direction. There is a moment when you realize that true freedom is not doing whatever you want. It is being able to want what actually serves you, to desire what builds instead of what burns, to value peace over intensity, security over drama, direction over distraction. This shift does not remove passion from life, it refines it. Passion grounded in purpose lasts. Desire guided by values deepens. Love chosen with intention strengthens. What fades is chaos, confusion, and the constant need for external validation. When standards rise, so do outcomes. Relationships become fewer but stronger. Attention becomes less important than respect. Excitement becomes balanced by trust. And the foot begins to feel solid instead of uncertain. This is not about perfection. It is about awareness practiced consistently. Small decisions repeated daily quietly reshape entire lives. What you tolerate becomes what you live with. What you choose intentionally becomes what you build. The harsh truth is not meant to wound, it is meant to wake. Because awareness gives you something priceless. Time to choose differently. Time to build stability before pressure arrives. Time to protect lives that will depend on your decisions, whether you see them now or not. You are not powerless. You are not broken. You are not destined to repeat patterns you did not understand before today. Understanding changes everything. It turns instinct into strategy, emotion into intention, and impulse into discipline. When you choose clarity over comfort, the future responds. When you choose standards over slogans, outcomes shift. And when you choose responsibility early, life becomes lighter later. This is the reward for staying conscious, not approval, not applause, but a life that stands firm when reality arrives, a future that does not collapse under pressure, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you chose with foresight, strength, and respect for what truly matters. What remains now is the decision to live consciously instead of reactively. Awareness without action fades. Insight without application dissolves. The real transformation begins when understanding becomes behavior and values become habits. This is where intention turns into identity. A life built on clarity is not chase approval. It chooses alignment. It does not confuse attention with worth or desire with direction. It understands that every meaningful future is constructed through consistent, often quiet, decisions made long before the outcome is visible. This is the kind of strength that lasts. When you commit to foresight, your standards become non-negotiable. Not because you fear loss, but because you respect consequence. You stop asking whether something feels good and start asking whether it builds something stable. You choose partners who demonstrate responsibility, not just promise emotion. You value presence that remains when excitement fades. You protect your future by refusing to gamble it on impulse. This mindset reshapes everything. Relationships stop being experiments and art becoming foundations. Boundaries stop feeling lonely and start feeling safe. You realize that saying no to what drains you is saying yes to what will sustain you. This is not restriction. This is direction. The most powerful people are not those who experienced everything. They are those who chose wisely, who understood that restraint is not loss but investment, that discipline is not control imposed from the outside, but self-respect practiced daily. And self-respect compounds. When you live this way, the noise quiets. Comparisons lose their grip. The pressure to prove anything disappears. You beg. In building a life that does not rely on chaos to feel alive. You create stability that allows joy to deepen instead of spike and crash. You experience connection that strengthens instead of fragments. This is how cycles end, not with blame, not with regret, but with conscious choice. With the willingness to step off the path that culture glamorized and walk the one that actually leads somewhere, the path that requires patience, the path that rewards maturity, the path that protects more than just you. The harsh truth is not meant to condemn, it is meant to empower. Because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. And once you understand how outcomes are shaped, you are no longer a passenger. You are the architect. You do not need to erase the past to claim the future. You need to learn from it. You need to respect the signals it sent. You need to choose differently now. That choice, repeated consistently, changes everything. A stable future is not built by chance. It is built by intention, by standards, by the courage to delay gratification in a world addicted to now. And by the wisdom to understand that true freedom is not endless choice, but the ability to choose what truly serves you. When you live with this awareness, life stops feeling unpredictable, not because it becomes easy, but because it becomes grounded. And in that grounding, something rare emerges. Peace, direction, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are building a future that can withstand reality instead of collapsing under it.